Hey friends, I'm Jen. I'm so glad you got the chance to experience camp this summer. As we continue our story, I just invite you to sit back, close your eyes, and then just picture yourself right in the story. Jesus and his disciples traveled to his hometown of Nazareth. When Jesus entered the synagogue, the Jewish place of worship, he was asked to read a portion of scripture from the prophet Isaiah. So Jesus stood and read from the scroll. God's Spirit is upon me, giving me power to help all those in need. I bring hope to the poor and the prisoners, and the blind will now see. The abused, hurting, and forgotten will be set free. This is the year. This is the time of God's blessing. After reading this, Jesus sat down, as was the custom before commenting about the scripture. The people looked at Jesus, anticipating his response. After a moment, Jesus said, "This scripture is being fulfilled right in front of you. This is why I have come." At this time, poverty was common, mainly because the Roman government imposed unreasonable taxes on people. Many struggled daily to find food, and disease and sickness were widespread. As Jesus traveled throughout the villages in the area, teaching people about God's kingdom, he felt deep compassion for them. Jesus healed people from all kinds of illnesses and even raised 2 people from the dead. Crowds surrounded Jesus everywhere he went. One time, when people found out which house Jesus was staying in, they packed into every room. There wasn't space for one more person, even outside the door. As Jesus was teaching about God's kingdom, 4 men brought their paralyzed friend on a mat to see Jesus, believing that he would heal them. But the only way they could get their friend inside the house was to climb on the roof, dig a hole through the clay tiles, and lower him down. When Jesus saw the hole in the roof, he was impressed with the effort and the faith of these men. Jesus looked at the paralyzed man lying on the floor in front of them and said, "Everything you've done wrong is forgiven." Some religious leaders were watching and listening to Jesus. They were offended by what Jesus said and asked each other, "Who does this man think he is? Only God can forgive people's sins." But Jesus knew what they were thinking and asked them, "Why are you so offended? Would you rather I had just healed him and not offered forgiveness? I'll prove to you that I have power beyond healing, power to forgive every kind of evil." Then Jesus told the paralyzed man, "Stand up, pick up your mat and walk home. You are healed." The man jumped up. He was no longer paralyzed. He pushed his way through the crowded house and out the door, and he ran home. People were filled with wonder and amazement. They thanked God, saying, "We've never seen anything like this before." On another day, after a long day of teaching, Jesus asked his disciples to take him in a boat across the lake to get away from the crowds for a while. As they set off, Jesus was exhausted, so he went to the back of the boat, put his head on a cushion, and fell asleep. All of a sudden, a violent storm blew in, with hard rain and strong winds. Waves crashed inside the boat. Even though some of the disciples were experienced fishermen, they couldn't keep the boat from filling with water. The disciples ran to the back of the boat in panic, waking up Jesus as they shouted, "Don't you care that we're going to drown?" Jesus awoke, stood up, turned towards the water, and said, "Quiet, be still." Instantly, the wind stopped blowing, and the lake became calm. Then Jesus asked his disciples, "Why were you afraid? Don't you believe in me yet?" The disciples were filled with wonder. They asked each other, "Who is this man? Even the water and wind listened to him. During his travels, Jesus sent his disciples out in pairs to nearby villages, giving them power to heal and teach others about God's kingdom. When they returned, they told Jesus about all the great things that God had done through them. Then Jesus said, "Let's go to a quiet place where we can rest for a while." People had surrounded them all day, so much so that Jesus and the disciples didn't even have time to eat. So they set off by boat to a secluded field where they could rest. The crowd spotted them and ran along the shore ahead of them. When Jesus stepped out of the boat, a huge crowd had already gathered in the field, and Jesus felt compassion for them, knowing that they needed someone to lead and care for them. So he began teaching them about God's ways. It was getting late in the day, so Jesus' disciples pleaded with him. "We're in a remote place here," they said. "Send the crowds away to a nearby farm to get something to eat." But Jesus said, "You feed them." "With what?" they asked. "We'd have to work for months to buy enough food for this crowd. We only brought 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish." Then Jesus told the disciples to divide the crowd into groups of 50 or 100 and have them sit down in the grass. Jesus took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, looked up into the sky, and asked God to bless the food. Then Jesus broke the bread into pieces and passed it to the disciples to give to the crowd. Jesus also divided the fish for everyone to share. Jesus continued to give food to the disciples until finally everyone in the crowd had eaten as much as they wanted. And there were 12 baskets of leftover bread and fish. Thousands were fed that day. Some said 5,000 families. Wherever Jesus went, in villages, cities, and across the countryside, people pressed in to be close to him. They carried the sick and the crippled and begged Jesus to touch them. And Jesus felt great compassion for the people and healed them. One time, Jesus explained where his power to perform these miracles came from. Jesus said, "I don't do any of this on my own. God gives me the power to heal, raise the dead, and give life. Those who believe in me will find new life with God that's never ending."